أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمخلوقين سيدنا ونبينا وشفينا أبو القاسم محمد صلى الله عليه وآله وسلم أما بعد بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي. Sisters and brothers, Assalamu alaikum. This is our third session on trying to see what happened after Karbala, and as far as possible trying to trace the influence of the events of Karbala on the post-Kerbala period. Last time we looked at the time briefly. We also looked at some of the Abbasid rulers, and we saw that both the friends of the Ahlul Bayt and the enemies of the Ahlul Bayt want to use the idea of the Ahlul Bayt as a point of legitimacy. So the enemies want to get people to forget the legacy of the Ahlul Bayt so that they can be free to do what they want to do. The friends, some of them want to use it to promote their own ends and become or rule. And one of those friends, after the very anti-Ahlul Bayt rule of the Umayyads, were the Abbasids. They came to power pretending to be friends of Ahlul Bayt, and then, of course, proceeded to play politics with the followers of Ahlul Bayt, sometimes supporting them, sometimes not supporting them, sometimes oppressing them, sometimes leaving them free, and so on. And in this process, hopefully we will see tomorrow or day after that, when we see the history of the shrines of Karbala and Najaf, that several times these shrines have been built and destroyed by different forces for different reasons. And twice or three times, maybe during the Abbasid times, they have been built and destroyed, depending on whether they found themselves wanting to ally themselves with the followers of Ahlul Bayt or not. And primarily Shiism centered on that area around Kufa, Karbala and Najaf. But as we saw towards the end of last time, that some of them who were oppressed or who went out and started to settle in different parts of the Muslim world. And last time we started to look at some of the people who settled in places like the what is called Shahr-e-Ray, or south of Tehran, which is now in south of Tehran, or Marv, which is in Khorasan province, not quite Mashhad, but not far from there. Some in Isfahan, and so on. So small pockets of people who felt a bit safer away from the seat of power in Baghdad. Because one of the things which the Abbasids did was to move the capital or center of Iraqi, if you like, power from Kufa to Baghdad. They built Baghdad as a new, fresh city and established themselves there. So the further away you were from there, probably you were freer in practicing whatever you wanted to do. And of course, a lot of them started to influence people around them. However, by and large, Iran at that time remained a predominantly Sunni country. Now, as the Abbasid rule became oppressive towards the end, they started to make a lot of concessions to the followers of Ahlul Bayt in Kufa, Karbala, Najaf. But perhaps it was a bit late. Other forces, other peoples who had accepted Islam saw the weaknesses and started to encroach on the Abbasid power. And one of the big peoples who made these moves were called the Buids, who by any account were quite well disposed to the followers of Ahlul Bayt, and by many accounts were probably Zaydis, the followers of Zayd bin Ali, who had developed a blend of Shiism and Sunnism, in the sense that Zayd advocated that we have no problems with the first two caliphs, and then we go on from Imam Ali on. And so he had a way to keep both sides happy. And the Buids capitalized on them and established themselves. Now, during, of course, this period, which is after the Abbasid period, so you're looking at something like 932. So if you see 680 is the massacre in Karbala. So about 250 years after that was the advent of the Buids. The other main development in the Abbasid period, which is of significance to our subject matter today, was that we had the succession of Imams and, of course, the Ghaiba of the 12th Imam as well, and then the shorter occultation first, Ghaibat Sugra, and then the longer occultation. So this was towards the end of the Abbasid period. As long as there was the presence of a physical Imam, although as we saw in the first lecture, there were a number of people who went their own way and said, well, we want to be more active, or we want to be more political, and they took their own path even against the wishes of the Imams. But those were short-lived. But once the Imams were not physically present, and even the possibility of what in theology is called niyaba khas, or a specific designation by the Imam to a Safir to act on his behalf, all kinds of other questions came into view. And so towards the end of Abbasid rule, we also had this problem that there was no physical presence of the Imam, the last one being in Ghaiba. And even to this day, we don't have any indication when the Imam will come back. So you have a long, indefinite period of time in which you have no direct link with the Imam. Of course, we will see that there are lots of people who said we have direct communication and we have this and we have that. And others who said, no, we don't have, but we should rely on X, Y, Z. And it opened up a number of question marks as to what needs to be done in the absence or the ghaiba of the Imam. I will see today some of the doctrinal issues which came up from there and some of the consequences of those issues as well. So, fortunately, under the Buyids, when the situation was a bit more relaxed, these issues could be debated at length and discussed, and a number of key scholars also came up with kind of formulations to what to do. Just to give you a flavor of the kind of issues which needed to be dealt with in the ghaiba of the Imam, yeah? So, the first one. Is it possible to offer Friday prayers? Because Salatul Jummah is supposed to be offered in the name of the Imam, or by the Imam, or by a direct appointee of the Imam. So this becomes an issue, that the Imam is not there now. So either you say you cannot offer Salatul Jummah, and this has been, I think, for the majority of time up to now, this has been the position, that Salatul Jummah is not fard in the absence of the Imam. It's been changing lately, but up and down, I think 1,000 years of, about 600 years now, literally 400 years, it has not been practiced. The second question, can anybody other than the Imam declare jihad if you are either threatened or you want to have jihad? Very difficult. Third question, even more important, can anybody other than the Imam collect taxes like kharaj or khums or zakat? Another difficult question. So in the beginning of the ghaiba, there was a lot of expectation that the Imam will be returning soon. And so people devised their own ad hoc ways of overcoming this. Okay, salat and jihad can be postponed for a little while. Giving of khums and zakat was more difficult. So some people used to bury their khums and zakat in the ground, saying that when the Imam comes, we'll give it to him. And people did all kinds of individual rationalization of how to deal with this problem, because there was no theory and there was no time scale of when the Imams will be coming back. In this time, also developed one conception which was more based in Najaf and Kufa that time, and that was a school which is later and now also still now known as Akhbarism, or people who literally follow the texts. So they said, we follow the sayings of the Imams, and of course the Quran. I will not make any judgment on them or any development on them. That's it. In fact, there's a very parallel development amongst the Sunni world on this subject, and that comes in the form of Ash'arism, which again is a more literal following of the texts. At the same time, as the Muslim world was growing and there was an influence of outside thinkers and different ways of looking at it, there emerged a school which is known as the Mu'tazili school, which gave a lot more room for rational thinking, for reason in thought. And so essentially, they argued that one could use the base of the texts and the hadiths and other narrations and use one's intellect to derive solutions to emerging questions, which we know today as ijtihad. The Akhbaris said, no, this is wrong. And we'll see a little bit later where this debate's reached, because it it is critical to solution of the problem of what to do in the Ghaiba. Otherwise, you're stuck there. But the feelings between the two sides, the Akhbaris and what came to be known as the Usulis, the people who built from principles, was so high that at different points in time, for example, in the beginning, when the Akhbaris were ascendant, they branded the Usulis as kafirs. And up to the point saying that if you touch them, you're najis. And even in Najaf, where there was a strong presence of the Akhbaris, if an Usuli wandered in, he might be beaten up by gangsters, encouraged by the other side. Later on, when the Usulis became ascendant, they branded the Akhbaris as the kafirs. So it is quite both were followers of Ahlul Bayt. They were trying to do the best as they can see, but you could see how feelings ran so high. And this issue of takfir also tells us that these things can flare up. It doesn't need ISIS to bring takfir. Takfir can get from different parts into different places. Anyway, so that debate started, and the Buyids were later on followed by the Seljuks, who were Turkic peoples, who were, of course, much more Sunni-oriented, Hanafi-oriented, rather than like the Buyids, who were more pro-Imam Ali. And so lots of other restrictions started to come on Najaf and Karbala in terms of operations. But political expediency forced them to make compromises here and there, and somehow these centers survived without any great damage during the Seljuk period. After the Seljuk period, we have a huge problem for the Muslim world overall that time, and that is the invasion of the Mongols. Now, those of you who have read about this will see that when they came, they completely destroyed Baghdad, other centers of learning, and so on. They were just like locusts, came and destroyed. But in the process, on the way back, they started to become Muslim as well. Now, this was the problem of the overall Muslim world, predominantly Sunni at that time. Somehow, it seems that the Shi'i small centers did not feature as a big problem for them, so they left them alone. And some of the scholars were able to negotiate local kind of safe passages, so it wasn't really detrimental to the growth of Shi'ism. And the Mongols went back. Some of them became Muslims and so on. But for that part, they were followed by the Timurids in especially area of Iran and parts of Iraq. Of course, the Ottomans also rose up from the other side after the Seljuks, who were staunchly and strongly Sunni, Hanafi. The Timurids, again, pro-Shia, and so they allowed a relative degree of freedom. Now, it's interesting here to note one thing, that apart from political alliances and political expediency, there was, because of the upheavals, and the Mongol upheaval as well, a lot of Muslims started to withdraw inwards, disappointed with the exercise of political power. And inwards, mainly towards Sufism. So, introspection, Sufism, and some extreme forms of Sufism even said, I don't need to pray, I can contemplate, I am one with God, and all kinds of other formulations. And Sufism at that time predominantly was amongst the Sunnis. The Shia scholars were anti-Sufism at that time. However, interesting things come out, and after the Timurids, in opposition to the to the Ottomans on that side, of course we don't have time to go into the Ottoman side because then there is the Crusades and all kinds of other things on that side, which will take us quite out. We just want to concentrate on our subject. There was a group of Sufis which were called the Kizilbash. Kizilbash means 12. They had 12 pointers in their red caps representing the 12 Imams. So they were somehow mystically related to the 12 Imams. And one of the first Safavid rulers or Safavid aspirants was able to mobilize them and become the head of that order. And he also claimed descent from the seventh Imam. Sometimes claimed to be the next Imam, and sometimes claimed to be the shadow of the Imam, and all kinds of things. So by this very, if you like, unclear discourse, was able to become or portrayed himself as pro-Shia/Isnashiri. When he was able to get power in Iran, especially, Iran was a predominantly Sunni country. Now you have here very strong Shia leader, a Sunni country. And you have a Akhbari establishment in the main shrine cities of Najaf and Karbala, which says that this kind of thing is off now. The Imam is in Gaiba, we should just follow the limited doctrine we have. So interestingly, what he did, he went to the mountains of Lebanon, South Lebanon, which are called Jabal Amil, the mountains of Amil, where there were strong pockets of Shi'i scholars who had a lot of problems with the Ottomans, and then the Crusaders, and so on. And he encouraged a number of those scholars to come to Iran or Persia and preach Shiism. With those scholars, and I must say, a lot of disproportionate force. Iran was forcibly converted into Shiism during the Safavid period. So 1500 onwards, another 200 years to convert Iran into Shiism. Which is this is a fact. And if you look at any history of that, you can see that a lot of it was force, not conversion by consent. But to back this up, some of those scholars started a new innovation. Up to the Abbasids, we saw that the problem was whether to curse Muawiyah or to curse Imam Ali. Each side was sort of grappling there. And we also saw that there was this idea of taqiyya, or hiding or not making known your true beliefs, because there was danger, especially in the Umayyad times. In Safavid times, this idea of taqiyya started to take a different meaning. Some of these scholars started to argue that, look, there are a number of things which we have been hiding, which we now should be openly propagating, because we have a state now. So they were, for example, that the Quran we have is not complete. There are parts of it which actually show the wilayat of Imam Ali and all kinds of other things. There are commentaries on it which are hidden, which were only with Imam Ali and so on. There are other attributes of the Aimma, bringing them nearer to divinity or mysterious powers and so on, which are not there. Now we should propagate them. And more importantly, it's not only enough to curse Muawiyah, we have to curse the whole line of the caliphs from one, except Imam Ali, of course. And this was to force Shiism onto Iran. But these innovations have stuck. And this is where part of the problem comes. We saw yesterday from the Sheikh that in terms of a mainstream narrative, there is very little which we differ on if we come towards commonly agreed sources, right? But once you go this way, which Safavid discourse took, then the meaning of taqiyya becomes that although you are saying you are not anti-us, you are in your heart anti-us. In your heart you are swearing at us, although you are saying that you are not. This continued for a long time through the Safavid time, enforced by different scholars. And you can see the impact of this. For example, when Mukhtar managed to kill Omar Saad. Omar ibn Saad was, of course, one of the commanders, key commanders in Karbala under Abdullah ibn Ziyad. Yeah? So, this was a time of celebration, which is still celebrated in many places, or called Eid-e-Zahra, where, of course, they celebrate the killing of the killer of Imam Hussein. In Safavid times, this also became translated into a cursing of the second caliph, which is totally uncalled of and totally unknown in the Shiism of pre-Safavi eras. Okay? So you can see that this polemic transferred itself into something which today comes back to haunt us. Because now to get rid of it is very, very difficult. Okay? The second thing which happened was that because the Qizilbash and the Safavis were Sufis, then Sufism slowly also started to be harnessed for spreading Shiism in Iran. And a lot of it become quite acceptable. And then, of course, there is a tendency within Sufism to be harnessed, because a lot of Sufi orders, they take Imam Ali alayhi salam and some of the other Aimma as pillars in their chain of authority, or in their chain of rank, until the main pole of most of them is Imam Ali alayhi salam, except for the Naqshbandi order, where Imam Ali is not at the top. So the ulama, some of them started to incorporate Sufism back into a Shi'i discourse. The third thing, which is a little bit more important, is that now you have a Shi'i state. So, do you pray the Friday prayers in the name of the king? Do you collect the taxes for the king? Do you fight for the king? Jihad. This is where Akhbari discourse would not accept it. But the scholars from Jabal Amil were Usulis. And in their reasoning, they said this is possible in the Gaiba of the Imam. So, Shiism developed a way of coexisting, if you like, with another authority. Although, as I said, the first Safavids were a little bit devious in the saying that they were Imam's descendants and not, and here and there, all kinds of things which gave them cover to play. But they developed a discourse of acceptance of a state or kingdom which was not ruled by the Imam himself or his direct representative, and praying the Jummah in their name. We'll see tomorrow, inshallah, that the same thing happened in India, in the Shi'i states of Awadh and so on. The discussion was whether to pray Jummah in the name of the Nawab or not. And this is also something which astute observers have commented up to today. If you look at the discussion before the present revolution in Iran, especially the works of people like Dr. Ali Shariati, one of his more controversial books is Tashayyu'e Alawi or Tashayyu'e Safavi. Alawi Shi'ism against Safavi Shi'ism. So you see, he is hinting here that somehow Safavi time ulama deviated from the main central message of Imam Ali's time by accepting this kind of rule, okay? And that caused him a lot of trouble. Well, he didn't live to see the revolution, otherwise we don't know what may have happened. But the central idea which came from him or expressed by him in this book is that this kind of accommodation of power corrupts the whole idea of Imam Ali's message. Because he said, clearly, I mean the English proverb, he who pays the piper calls the tune. That's what Shariati, the Shariati as a sociologist, was saying. But the Safavids endowed lots of lands, endowments, all kinds of facilities to the scholars to develop their, activities. In fact, during some of the weaker Safavi kings, the scholars had become so strong that they were able to dictate a lot of policies to the kings as well. The kings were afraid that these guys are even powerful than us. They had created them. Okay, so we'll see a bit more of this issue later on, tomorrow, maybe day after, as to how this thing plays out into what sort of theory of governance has emerged amongst the followers of Ahlul Bayt. Clearly, you can see that this is not something which has been predetermined. This has been evolving according to the timeline of the Ghaiba, according to the situation which at different times the scholars and Shi'i people find themselves, and they have developed this. Now it's interesting that at the end of Safavi time, when Safavi power was, being weakened, and there was actually an invasion of Iran by mostly Afghans, who were very staunch Sunnis that time. There was a general who was aiding them, aiding the Iranian, and his name was Nadir Shah. Nadir Shah eventually became Shah, of course, because he was quite an adept general. Now, just to round off, Nadir Shah, although he came from a supposedly Shi'i family and was part of the Sufi orders of Safavi and all that thing, when he came, he had a dual kind of personality. He said, I want to make Iran back into a Sunni state. Iran, as I said, had become Shi'i after all this, whatever. And the cursing of the caliphs is prohibited. That's one. To pacify the Afghan supporters. But then he tried to make a deal with the Ottomans. He said that we can make a deal if you agree to have the Jafari fiqh as one of the 5, in addition to the 4 Sunni schools. So you can see the concern of somebody like Nadir Shah. Not religious, it's political. How to keep all sides happy. But you can see the central issue still is the followers of the Ahlul Bayt. Okay? So I think what we want to draw from today's discourse is this, that certain changes emerged during Safavi times, which really poisoned the discourse with Muslims, and which really took the focus away from the wildness of Muawiyah to other things, which are more difficult to deal with, and they're not central to the discussion, which poisoned the idea of taqiyya altogether. Instead of a self-protective thing, it became a kind of deceptive life. And we are still living with it today. So, inshallah, tomorrow we want to see some more of this discussion and see how these events unfold. Assalamu alaikum.
Thank you very much. We have some time for questions from either side. So, any questions from the sister side?
Assalamu alaikum. Um, the Muslims of Spain tried to do taqiyya, but when they were forced to convert into Christianity, but they still tried to practice the Islam. So how is it that the Sunnis of Iran didn't try to practice the religion and didn't try to convert back to Sunnism, and the Iranians of today would probably not even know that this happened, and they are such staunch Shias right now that I've never heard an Iranian say, "Oh, this happened and we were converted." So I'm quite surprised to hear this because I've never heard it before. So I'm surprised that they didn't try to convert back themselves when they were being forced to convert to Shiism.
I think probably the Iranians want to forget that time. Huh? But the point is this, as I said, the kind of answer to that is in the fact of the use of Sufism. Because a lot of the Sunni Iranians were also Sufis. Through Sufism, it is very easy to cultivate the love of the Ahlul Bayt. And so when you are changing over or forced to change over or whatever, it's not like being asked to become a Christian or to swear at anybody or anything. It's just to ask you to additionally love some people. Later on, towards the end, when we are getting this idea of cursing the other caliphs and so on, you're already converted. So it's not, and you don't do it or you do it, it doesn't matter, right? So in that way, it became possible because Sufism was the bridge. But you will see tomorrow that later on the ulama becomes against Sufis once the job is done. And it goes to and fro. But this, if you like, innovations in Safavid times of demonizing other parts of the Muslims were very difficult to take out.
Any questions from the brother side?
Assalamu alaikum. Thank you for your talk, which I greatly enjoyed. If you could just re-explain for me, please, how the meaning of taqiyya changed, because I didn't follow that. Thank you.
You see, in the Umayyad times, taqiyya, in especially the, if you like, key Shi'i areas, right? Mostly around Kufa and so on, meant that you do not declare yourself to be in favor of any of the imams or their right to succession, things like that, which was against the thing, right? So that was like, keep yourself safe. There, some of these Jabal Amil ulama said, no, that's not. We have been in taqiyya, we have not been saying actually what we feel about the other caliphs, about this, that, so we now need to openly announce it. This had never been the problem before. By following Imam Hussein, you are already declaring implicitly, right, that you don't agree with Muawiyah, for example. But you are not saying anything about before that. So this transformation is what's causing the problem.
So the Jabal Amal ulama said we have to come out of taqiyya and not just stop doing taqiyya, but go to the other extreme.
Yes.
Okay.
Not go, loudly go. This is what they...
Any other questions from the sister side?
Thank you for another very informative talk. My question would be, moving forward, how can we strip Shia Islam from all these developments that have happened during the Safawi period so that we can go back to the Alawi Shiism that we were supposed to follow from the start? Because so much has happened, so much has evolved over these years, and looking at what Muslims are going through today and Shia Muslims are going through today, the things that have happened during the Safawi period have starkly influenced the things that people still deal with, that Shia still deal with.
Okay, we'll see a bit more in the next two, but just a bit here. is that, for example, some of the things have already been stripped off. So, for example, if you look at the beautiful and important works of people like the late Sayyid Abul Qasim Khoei, Ayatollah Abul Qasim Khoei, he has very clearly put forward that the Quran as we have it is the Quran. There is nothing more or less. There is no other bits and pieces here or there, just forget it. This is it. So those ideas that you have a secret Quran and you have something there, it is gone. So other things like that have been stripped off. And all these other misconceptions, right, that you believe. You see, the question is that one of the key problems is that the shafaat of the Prophet and the Aimam is a very delicate issue to handle. It's very easy to jump from that to agency, that the Aimma themselves will do something, rather than you ask them, their good offices, to ask Allah to grant you whatever you want, right? It's very easy to jump from them to say, oh, you, Ya Hussein, you do this for me, you do this for me. So that takes you towards a little bit dangerous area of shirk and kufr. And it's very delicate. And simple, you go to the ziyaras and things and you see people, all kinds of people, they read all kinds of things, right? Now, this is not easy to strip off. Of course, lots of scholars, any scholar writing will say that you can't do that. You have to understand that it's Allah, but you can appeal through them. And shafaat is a well-established principle in Quran as well. It's not something which is out. So that needs more understanding to strip off. Plus, you must remember that a lot of people who accepted Islam also had their own cultures, in which they had different kinds of appeals, from idols to all kinds of gods and so on. So if you want to now translate that into shafaat, you see that you are already starting from a very, very, dodgy platform. And if you then push it one way, then you have a problem.
So, in terms of the idea of infallibility, do we have clear proof when it first appeared? Because it could well be something that has developed later during the Safavid period, rather than something that has been established when the Imams were still on this earth.
I think as far as I know, Isma is not, or infallibility is not part of the Safavid discourse. It's before that. Infallibility is, of course, as the Sheikh was saying yesterday, is part of the Quranic discourse, yeah? Innama yuridullah, that Allah has purified them. Now, of course, how you understand purification and so on. But from infallibility to divinity, that's the problem. So when we are going through all these tribulations, that every time there is a new regime, we have oppressed and oppressed, until Safavid times, there was always lots of people said, look, we have to now think that the Imam has gone into Gaiba, 6th Imam, 7th Imam, 3rd Imam, 4th Imam, and then Zayd and all kinds of other people, Muhammad ibn Hanafiya, and they will come back to save us, and they have mysterious powers. So it's not infallibility, but divinity. So it's like, you see in Christianity also, because of the miracles attributed to Isa alayhi salam, he was increasingly invested with divinity. See, so until he became godlike and God to some Christians, right? And this is a slippery slope, but it didn't start there. It started by Allah's blessing to grant Isa alayhi salam the power to cure people or to do a number of things which appeared to be godlike.
Brother, I was not very clear to me why the Safawi choose the Shi'ism. This change. But I did hear, or I read, that one of their kings, he used to love his wife. And he was, I think he's an angry man. And he said talaq to her 3 times and he couldn't return to her. And he was worried about it, and somebody advised him that there is Ja'fari or Shi'ism can help him in this. Is this true, or where does this story come with this revelation of your...
I have not heard about it. It may be part of the story. You know, different individuals are moved by different things. But as far as I know, the association with this Sufi order of the Kizilbash, this is the critical thing. Because they were really quite dedicated fighters. And they could defeat the Ottoman and Seljuk armies at that time. And these Safavid rulers were part of that order. So it is, and this Kizilbash means, of course, 12 pointers or 12 points in their hats representing the 12 imams. So definitely they were already in touch with the Imami discourse, albeit in a very mystical form. So I don't think they needed that. They already had it. But Allahu Alam.
Any questions from the sister side? Final questions from the brother side?
Oh, she's coming. Sorry.
Others?
Okay, Assalamu alaikum. So, do I have a permission to add on, Dr. Iqbal Asaria?
Please.
Okay, we're talking about Safavid that take over and brought people to Shiism. If anybody wants to take a note, most welcome. Sayyid Mohsen Amin Amuli in Ayal al-Shia, the volume 10, page 363, talks about how the present Shia's practicing is forbidden. Jalal al-Ahmad is the same. And then we go to the time of Sheikh Mufid and Sayyid Murtaza Ansari. All the amal at the present time of the Shias is not recognized in his time. Then we go to Sayyid Abul Hussein Isfahani in Najaf and Mirza Qawmi. In the book of Kashif al-Qita, the same message will be given. Then Shaheed al-Thani by Khur Amuli, Sheikh Khur Amuli, is the same thing being mentioned. The present scholars such as Shaheed Mutahari and Ayatollah Shaheed Beheshti, which in a book of Hamas Hosseini or the book of Marja'iyat wa Rohaniyat declared many wrongdoing of the Shiism. And then the Safavid increased all these ideology because they start going to Europe and bring all the they practicing in forms of Christianity back to Iran. This is I just wanted to mention, and inshallah everybody will benefit from it. Thank you very much.
Thank you. This is, of course, a lot of it is post-Safavi, but that's fine. Yes?
Any final questions? I think we'll end there. Salawat.